Welcome to Threads of Truth, where missing persons and unresolved mysteries meet the theories that try to explain them.
Today, we're exploring a vanishing act that took place not on land, but deep beneath the surface of a seemingly recreational Florida dive spot.
We're looking at a case where the physical reality of an environment just fundamentally contradicts the most logical assumption of what happened.
We are examining the 2010 disappearance of Ben McDaniel at Vortex Spring, Florida.
Now, for those of you who aren't familiar with it, Vortex Spring is this massive natural spring. It's known really as a commercial dive park.
Right, a place for training, for open water certifications. It looks welcoming on the surface.
But beneath that accessible surface lies a vast, highly restricted, and historically very dangerous underwater cave system that drops hundreds of feet straight down into the earth.
And Ben McDaniel was 30 years old when he vanished on August 18th, 2010.
So the immediate, the rational assumption, given that you have this known lethal cave system, was tragedy.
Of course. People just assumed he succumbed to the labyrinthine dangers down there. But here's the unsettling reality.
What's that?
Extensive searches were conducted by, world-class cave recovery specialists. They covered that entire known system, and they came back empty-handed.
And when we say empty-handed, you have to understand, we mean completely empty.
No body.
No primary diving equipment.
Right.
And crucially, they found no physical evidence. Things like disturbed sediment or, scrapes on the rock.
Yeah.
To suggest a 210-pound man had experienced trouble in the narrowest, deepest parts of that system.
And this is why the mystery shifts entirely for you, the observer. It's no longer just a question of where Ben is.
Right.
It becomes this baffling question of how he vanished so utterly, leaving behind a scene that's just littered with suspicious, contradictory clues that almost seem designed to confuse.
Okay, let's try to unpack this vanishing act. I think to really appreciate the environment he went into, we first need to understand the man himself.
Yeah, and the immense pressures he was under leading up to that August in 2010.
So tell us about Ben McDaniel, the man before the mystery.
Well, the sources paint a picture of a man experiencing just profound personal and financial turmoil.
And this context is absolutely critical, isn't it?
It is, because it provides motivation for not just a tragic accident, but also for the possibility of a staged disappearance.
What specifically was he facing? It sounds like more than just, standard life stress.
Oh, it was compounded crises. First he was navigating a divorce. That's inherently stressful for anyone.
Of course.
But then you layer on top of that significant business and financial issues. Reports indicated he was dealing with some serious debt.
I read he reportedly owed a pretty substantial amount to the IRS.
Substantial amount, yes. And when you combine that acute personal sort of failure with major economic pressure, it really narrows a person's perceived options.
Right.
Dramatically.
And then there was this element of raw, acute grief, which can just completely destabilize someone.
Yes, that is the thread of emotional devastation that truly stands out. Only months before his disappearance, Ben suffered the sudden, just devastating loss of his younger brother.
Who died from an aneurysm, right? Completely unexpected.
Completely. And that kind of profound, acute grief, it often pushes individuals toward seeking escape or radical change, or sometimes rash, high-risk behavior. It can be a form of self-medication or just seeking a challenge to feel something else.
So what we have is a man who is emotionally raw, he's financially trapped, and he's looking for solace or distraction.
And he found it in diving.
Which leads us to his specific interest in Vortex Spring. What was his background there? Was he equipped for this kind of environment?
He was definitely an enthusiastic diver. He was certified advanced open water.
Okay, so for you listening, that means he was competent in many open water environments. Coastal diving, navigating slightly deeper areas, generally proficient with his gear.
Yes. However, and this is the crucial distinction that really underlies the whole accidental death theory, he completely lacked the highly specialized certification required for cave diving.
What is the difference? Why is cave diving a different world entirely?
It's not just about being deeper. Cave diving introduces the absolute necessity of dealing with overhead environments.
Meaning you can't just ascend directly to the surface.
That option is gone. It requires meticulous planning, a completely redundant set of gear, specialized line placement, and crucially, specialized gas mixtures.
Right, you need things like trimix or nitrox at depth, not regular air.
Exactly, and that's because of the risk of nitrogen narcosis.
Let's define that term because it's so vital to the accident theory. What is nitrogen narcosis?
It's essentially gas poisoning. It happens when you breathe regular air at deep pressures. The nitrogen becomes physiologically active, and it induces this state of euphoria, confusion, impaired judgment.
It's often described as being severely drunk or intoxicated, but underwater.
That's a perfect description. And in a confined, dark cave environment, if you succumb to narcosis, you forget your training, you lose your way, and panic sets in very, very quickly. It's an immediate death sentence if you're far from the exit.
So Ben, despite being a certified diver, was fundamentally unprepared for the challenges of this specific lethal environment.
Precisely. And the environment itself, it had a notorious history.
The Vortex Spring cave system is infamous.
It is. The sheer danger of it resulted in 13 fatalities just in the 1990s alone.
13, that's a staggering number.
It is. And that high death toll forced the owners to act, to protect life, but also their business.
Which is why the most crucial, most dangerous section of the cave, the part that dips down into the deepest, most restricted passages, was locked off.
Exactly. They installed an underwater gate, which was literally locked, restricting access. Only certified, experienced cave divers with explicit permission and a key were supposed to pass that point.
And this leads us directly to the evening of August 18th, 2010.
It does. Let's walk through the timeline of his final confirmed movements.
Okay.
Ben had already shown this persistent, maybe reckless interest in that restricted area. He'd been seen near the cave entrance before.
And he'd even been witnessed trying to jimmy or force the locked gate open on previous occasions, right?
Yes. He was determined to get in there and explore that restricted area. He was not subtle about his intentions at all.
Not at all.
And so the last interaction he had was with two Vortex Spring employees, a Chuck Cronin and an Eduardo Turan. Shortly before 7 p.m., they saw Ben preparing for his dive right near that restricted entrance.
And Taryn, one of the employees, he recognized Ben's determination.
He did, and critically, he was worried Ben would injure himself or maybe damage their expensive gate trying to force it open.
So Taryn made a decision that in retrospect becomes the focal point of this whole tragedy.
In what you can only call a catastrophic moment of misplaced assistance, Taryn unlocked the gate for Ben.
He gave him access.
He gave Ben access to the very part of the system he was physically and technically unprepared for. Taryn watched him proceed, then he resurfaced. And that was the last known, confirmed sighting of Ben McDaniel alive.
The alarms didn't go off immediately, though, did they? They must have just assumed he drove away after his dive.
They did. It wasn't until the next morning when staff realized his vehicle, a pickup truck, was still sitting there in the parking lot.
Some accounts say it was even 2 days later.
The timeline is a little fuzzy, but the search began quickly once staff noted the truck was still there, and that's when the discovery phase began.
And the truly suspicious and frankly confusing details started to pile up.
They really did.
Let's focus on the truck and what was inside, because these details are where the mystery really solidifies. What did investigators find inside Ben's locked vehicle?
This is where the case becomes deeply puzzling. Okay, so the truck was locked, but the items left inside completely defied logic for either a quick accident or, a planned disappearance.
What did they find?
They found his wallet, his driver's license, his cell phone, all the things he would need to be identified or to communicate. And most notably, a significant amount of cash, almost $1,100.
Leaving his ID, his phone, and that amount of cash behind? That's a massive red flag.
It's a huge red flag.
If he intended to return, it suggests he thought he'd be back in a moment. But if he intended to run, why on earth would he leave the cash?
Exactly. It supports two completely contradictory narratives at the same time.
One is the immediate accident theory.
He anticipated coming right back for his essentials, and he didn't make it.
And the other.
The staged disappearance theory. That he deliberately left behind the identifying information and the cash to solidify the narrative that he vanished irrevocably at Vortex Spring. Maybe the cash was left to make it look like he didn't need it for an escape.
They also found his dive logs.
Yes, including a map he had actually made of the cave system himself. This shows you he had this intense, almost obsessive interest in planning this specific dive. It feels premeditated.
Now, if he went diving, what should have been recovered and what was actually missing from the scene?
Well, his essential primary diving gear, his wetsuit, his fins, his mask, and the tank he would have used for the actual final dive.
Gone.
Nowhere near the truck or the entrance, they were simply gone. If he had drowned and his body was unrecoverable, you would still expect to find, at the very least, the primary tank he used somewhere near the entrance or discarded in the main passage.
But the only physical evidence recovered near the cave entrance was itself odd and confusing.
It was. Investigators found 2 tanks labeled with his name, but experts identified these not as primary tanks, but as decompression tanks.
Okay, let's clarify that for everyone listening. What is a decompression tank and why was their presence so suspicious?
So in serious cave or technical diving, you use different gas mixtures to breathe at different depths. A decompression tank is typically smaller, held closer to the body, and it contains a different gas mix, like 50% oxygen.
You use that only on the slow ascent back up after the main dive is over.
Exactly, to off-gas safely. The suspicion arose because these 2 recovered tanks contained regular air, just 21% oxygen.
Which is completely wrong.
Completely. Regular air is wholly inappropriate for deep decompression or deep cave exploration, where you need a mixture like trimix to mitigate the effects of that nitrogen narcosis we talked about.
So he was either planning a profoundly amateur dive.
Or someone placed these tanks there specifically to suggest an amateur dive had taken place.
That's the interpretation, right? Their placement, the mismatched air, the fact that the primary gear was missing, it suggested a staging error by an unpracticed diver.
Or a staged scene intended to imply a tragic amateur error.
This combination, the cache left behind, the vital gear missing, the amateur decompression tanks, it's just a masterclass in ambiguity.
It really is. And the initial search efforts only added to the confusion.
Right, because the first strong piece of evidence supporting the accidental drowning theory was actually pretty compelling.
Very compelling. Cadaver dogs alerted on the water surface right near the cave entrance. And for you, the listener, a cadaver dog alert is a powerful indicator of human remains or, decomposition products in the water.
But then subsequent scientific tests contradicted that.
They did. Subsequent water tests for decomposition, looking for the actual chemical signature of a decaying body, were entirely negative.
So the dogs confirmed a potential body, but the physical testing completely negated it.
The thread of truth starts to fray right there at the entrance.
And this is the point where the standard search and rescue failed, and world-class expertise had to be called in.
They brought in the absolute best in the field. Renowned cave explorers and recovery specialists like Ed Sorensen and Jill Heinerth.
These are divers who navigate systems far more complex and dangerous than Vortex Spring all the time.
On a regular basis, yes. They conducted these extensive, meticulous recovery efforts, squeezing into every conceivable passage and side tunnel.
And their methodology goes way beyond just swimming through the tunnels, doesn't it? It's almost forensic.
It is. It's forensic geology and physics, but underwater. They were searching every tight space, every crevice. They found no body, no lost equipment.
And critically, they noted no scuff marks on the rock.
Nothing that would indicate panic, a struggle, or entrapment. A panicking diver will scrape the cave walls trying to get free. There was nothing.
But the defining finding, the physical evidence that really speaks to the impossibility of the drowning theory, is the silt. Let's spend some time on this because this is the core of the entire contradiction.
This is the scientific fact that makes this case so unique. Cave systems like Vortex Spring are lined with this incredibly fine, delicate sediment silt, which settles undisturbed over time.
And this silt is so fine that the slightest movement, a misplaced hand, an exhaled bubble, can just cloud the water and leave a track.
An indelible track. And Ben was a substantial man.
He was 6'1", 210 pounds.
Exactly. So the experts were particularly focused on the narrowest, most restricted passages deep inside that cave. If a large man like Ben had traveled far into those sections, and certainly if he had struggled, panicked, or become trapped and died, the silt would have been irrevocably disturbed.
The environment would be clouded. There'd be clear tracks showing his movement.
Perpetually clouded. And this is not something that would just settle back down in a few hours or a few days.
No.
In those deeper, flow-restricted passages, that disturbance would be permanent, or at least last for weeks or months. And the definitive finding from that recovery team was the absolute absence of any silt disturbance.
The passages were pristine.
They were pristine. And because of that physical impossibility, a 210-pound man struggling to his death without leaving a single trace, the experts stated emphatically that based on the physics and the geological evidence, Ben McDaniel's body is simply not in that cave system.
And that is the most obvious answer. Accidental drowning hits a brick wall built of forensic certainty. The lack of evidence becomes the evidence itself.
So, if the world's leading experts are unanimous that the victim is not in the location everyone initially searched, then we have to shift our focus.
We have to look at the other theories.
The 4 leading alternative theories that try to account for this total absence of physical evidence inside the cave.
Let's start with theory A again, but frame it as the impossible accident. Accidental death in the restricted cave. This is the narrative his family likely hoped for in a way, because it provides a tragic answer.
Right, and the argument relies on a massive failure of judgment. Ben, untrained, using the wrong gas mixture.
Yeah.
You know, that regular air in those recovered deco tanks.
Yeah.
He succumbs quickly to nitrogen narcosis.
Confusion sets in, he gets disoriented, panics.
And either becomes trapped in some fissure or is buried under a sudden silt collapse in a section so obscure that the world's best divers somehow missed it.
But the searchers, people like Jill Heinrich, they explicitly reject this. How do they address that idea that they might have just missed a crucial side passage?
They always point back to the physics. They say the search was exhaustive. If he had traveled far enough to reach some inaccessible hiding spot, he would have had to travel through several narrow, restricted zones first.
And they know the dimensions of those passages.
They know the width of the openings. For a man of his size to push through, even calmly, he would have displaced the silt. For him to die struggling, it would have created a catastrophic disruption.
So their conclusion is consistent.
It is. The pristine condition of the deep cave makes it, and this is their phrase, extremely unlikely that he reached an inaccessible hiding spot. This rejection of the easiest answer is the fundamental conflict that keeps this case alive.
Okay, so if he didn't drown in the cave, we have to move to the intentional action theories. Theory B, the staged disappearance.
This argument suggests that Ben, facing this devastating financial ruin, the divorce, the crushing emotional weight of his brother's death, that he utilized the known danger and restricted nature of the cave to fake his own death.
To disappear and start a new life elsewhere with a clean slate. What evidence from the scene supports that intentional staging?
The evidence is circumstantial, but it's powerful. First, you have that pre-disappearance stress, the debt, the IRS, the grief. It provides a clear, overwhelming motive for seeking a radical escape.
And second, the contents of the truck.
The truck contents. If you are starting a new life, you need cash. Yet, he left almost $1,100, his wallet, and his ID behind.
And this is where you really have to challenge the premise. If he was running, why leave the cash? Wouldn't he need that money for the first leg of his escape?
And that is the essential counterpoint you have to consider. If he needed the money, he failed spectacularly. However, the theory posits 2 possibilities.
Okay.
1, he had far more cash with him that he used for his escape. Or 2, he deliberately left the essentials behind to reinforce the vanishing narrative.
I see. By leaving the cash and ID, he makes sure his disappearance looks like an immediate tragic accident.
She essentially provided the police with all the paperwork necessary to declare him tragically deceased at Vortex Spring.
That's a very cold calculation. But how do we weigh that against the fact that he was so clearly devastated by the loss of his brother? His family vehemently rejects the idea that he would just abandon them.
And their perspective is crucial. They cite his character, his emotional state. They argue he was too devastated by grief to inflict that level of pain on his remaining parents.
So you have to weigh the man they knew against the circumstantial evidence of a financial collapse.
It's a genuine struggle between emotional reality and logical deduction.
Moving to theory C, which is the darkest theory, foul play.
This suggests someone else was involved, either murdering him on land or retrieving his body from the cave and disposing of it elsewhere to ensure the vanishing looked exactly like a tragic diving accident.
This theory arises purely from the ambiguities of the scene, right? And some external history.
It does. Someone had to account for the missing primary gear, the wetsuit, the fins, the main tank. If Ben had, say, a medical incident right near the entrance, someone else would have had to quickly gather the critical evidence
Remove the body from the property.
and then strategically place those two mismatched regular air decompression tanks near the entrance to stage the scene.
That requires significant risk and coordination. It implies someone was actively trying to cover up a non-diving incident.
It does. And the speculation here, which we have to report impartially, is often fueled by the prior history of the Vortex Spring owner.
The sources indicate the owner had previous run-ins with the law.
Assault and kidnapping charges, yes, unrelated to diving. But this history, regardless of its actual relevance to Ben, provided this specific contextual fuel for online speculation.
The idea that someone had a motive, maybe to protect the reputation of the already infamous dive site.
Or perhaps something entirely unrelated to diving occurred on the expansive property, and the cave disappearance was just a convenient mask.
So if you're analyzing this, you're looking for who had the means and motivation to access the site, clean up the evidence, and then stage those two amateur tanks.
Exactly. It takes the mystery out of the cave and places it firmly back on the surface property and with the people who controlled access to it.
This brings us to Theory D, which is often favored by the diving experts themselves.
Yes, because it's the cleanest way to reconcile the conflicting physical evidence with the initial assumptions. The theory is, he never made it deep into the cave.
Explain that one.
This theory, which I find particularly compelling, it assumes the experts are 100% correct about the lack of silt disturbance.
Meaning Ben never actually passed the locked gate and entered the restricted, dangerous part.
Or he went in very briefly and exited almost immediately. The theory posits that he met with an unrelated non-diving tragedy elsewhere on the expansive property, maybe near the surface, the entrance area, or simply while walking back to his truck.
What's compelling about this is that it provides a perfect explanation for the one fact everyone agrees on,
Which is?
the total lack of evidence inside the restricted cave system.
Exactly. If he had a medical emergency, a fatal slip and fall on the rocks near the water's edge, or an accidental drowning in the open water area right after exiting the cave, the search focus would be entirely wrong.
The cadaver dogs alerting near the entrance would make sense. The body might have been there briefly.
Right, or passed through that surface water. But the subsequent expensive specialized cave searches would obviously come up completely empty.
So it essentially argues that the environment itself distracted investigators from the true location of the incident.
It uses the certified negative findings of the expert divers, that lack of silt displacement, to rationally redirect the investigation away from the impossible scenario. This theory is the logical bridge between the physical evidence and the initial focus on the cave.
Before we move on, let's just acknowledge the profound cultural life this case has developed. I mean, why over a decade later is this not just an old cold case file? Why is it an active, debated mystery in the digital world?
It's the perfect storm, and you, the listener, you're part of that process. You have the confined, dark, and inherently mysterious environment of the cave, a place that just captures the imagination.
And you combine that with the frustrating, total lack of physical evidence where it absolutely should be.
And when the professional consensus directly contradicts the initial obvious explanation, it creates a narrative vacuum.
And the human mind, as we know, absolutely hates a vacuum.
It does. People are constantly speculating, breaking down the evidence, revisiting the timeline, because the case presents this absolute contradiction. The emotional and logical threads are disentangled. The lack of resolution, combined with the extreme clarity of the expert negation, ensures the mystery endures.
So now we move to the core analysis. And this case really hinges entirely on what we call trusting the negative.
Yes, trusting the absence of evidence, specifically that undisturbed silt, as the most powerful indicator of the truth.
It requires a leap of faith for the layperson, I think, because in police work, if you don't find the evidence, you usually assume you just failed to look hard enough.
But here we have to rely entirely on the specialized judgment and expertise of people like Jill Heinerth and Ed Sorensen. Why are they so absolute in their rejection of the drowning theory?
They aren't relying on assumption. They're relying on specific, immutable physical constraints of the environment.
That's it. They rely on the forensic physics of the passage. They know the depth, the flow rate, the composition of the silt. If a 210-pound man experiences distress deep inside those passages, the laws of physics dictate he must leave evidence.
The energy required to move through those tight spaces, especially while struggling,
Would leave immediate and lasting signatures. The scuff marks, scraped gear, and most certainly massive disturbance of the delicate silt.
the pristine condition of those deep passages is the forensic conclusion. It's the difference between a general police search and a specialized geological examination.
Exactly. For a cave recovery specialist, a lack of disturbance is a definitive finding. It says with certainty, this man did not pass this way while in distress.
Therefore, the initial, most obvious answer, accidental cave death, is definitively rejected by those most qualified to judge. The contradiction is the key to understanding the case.
So if we accept that expert consensus that he is not in the cave, we're left with the intentional actions.
Staged disappearance or foul play on the surface.
And we have to apply Ben's personal turmoil back to these two remaining high probability options.
It makes both narratives more plausible, doesn't it?
It does. His profound grief and financial destitution provide a textbook motive for running away, for theory B. However, that same vulnerability also makes him a potential victim.
How so?
If he was distracted, emotionally raw, engaged in a high-risk activity late at night, he was highly susceptible to opportunists or unfortunate accidents that may have occurred near the surface. Theories C and D.
It just emphasizes the emotional difficulty of this case. Why does this absence of evidence make it so emotionally and culturally sticky?
Well, it highlights the unique emotional difficulty of accepting an underwater disappearance, especially one where the body is unrecoverable, even when the experts tell you the body wasn't lost where you think it was.
The public, the online communities, they look for narratives that provide closure, whether through tragedy, that he drowned, or agency, that he ran away.
Right. And the idea of the messy middle, that he dissolved entirely into the property without a trace via a non-diving accident or murder, is much, much harder to process.
It creates an unending void for the family. They can't bury him, and they can't definitively confirm he's not still out there, possibly having staged his escape.
The complete absence of evidence prevents that necessary closure required for the grieving process.
And this uncertainty actually forced the state of Florida to try to provide some kind of legal resolution, even if the facts are incomplete.
They did. In 2013, the state of Florida issued a death certificate. This is a legal necessity for handling estates, life insurance, taxes. It attempts to provide legal closure in the face of a factual, unsolved mystery.
But the case remains factual open, which just highlights that conflict between legal necessity and factual mystery.
Yes, what makes Ben McDaniel's case so truly unique is not just that he vanished. It's the high degree of certainty from the experts that the primary location everyone focuses on, that dangerous, locked cave, is not the answer.
Which redirects the true crime narrative firmly toward the staged, the intentional, or the criminal. It makes the environment itself a misdirection.
We are left with the definitive certainty that Ben McDaniel is not in the cave, and the absolute uncertainty of everything else. The man was last seen with the door to a certain death opening behind him, but the forensic evidence suggests he walked right past that door into the inexplicable.
It forces you to rethink what constitutes evidence in a mystery. Sometimes the most powerful truth is the concrete proof that something didn't happen.
And what we are certain of is the level of personal despair he must have felt.
Absolutely. Whether he planned his exit or suffered an accident, the overwhelming grief and financial ruin were the forces that drove him to Vortex Spring that night. Those emotional forces are the only real evidence we have that connects the man to the mystery.
The ambiguity here is a permanent feature of the case. It's a perfect example of how an environment, through its sheer danger, can provide an alibi for a crime or a cover for an escape, simply by being the obvious yet incorrect answer.
Ben McDaniel's disappearance remains one of the most frustrating cases in modern missing persons history. He was a man consumed by grief and debt, who seemed to dissolve entirely into the landscape of Vortex Spring,
Leaving behind only the threads of his personal struggles and an environment that absolutely refuses to give up its secrets, yet definitively refuses to take the blame for his vanishing act.
The contradiction between that initial assumption of tragedy and the expert certainty of absence ensures this mystery will continue to haunt both the diving community and the dedicated amateur sleuths online for years to come.
Consider this unsettling thought as you leave this discussion. If the most dangerous location in the story is definitively ruled out, does that make the seemingly safe surroundings even more terrifying?
And next time on Threads of Truth, we examine the story of Alyssa Turney, a case where the search for a missing teen became something far more complicated.